What's going on, everybody? I'm Sage, and we just finished up the Mythic Plus, the third Mythic Plus testing weekend. It actually got cut a little bit short because of a bug that got introduced where when you placed the key in and you pressed accept, it wouldn't start the key. And we're not sure, what happened with all of that, but they did kind of cut testing about a day short because of that bug that never got fixed. This was actually the same kind of bug that we've had, I believe it was like week one in Azure Vaults. Azure Vaults had that same kind of bug issue. When you would zone into it, it wouldn't let you start the key up. So we didn't get to test everything that we wanted to. I had a couple other iterations of builds and just some numbers and stuff I wanted to try out on that last day, but didn't get the opportunity to do all of the testing, but we did do a fair amount of it. And I wanted to kind of just go over what we've learned or what I've learned, and as well as, looked into from the spec, from just other resources, Wowhead, so on and so forth, and kind of deliver any of that new information we've learned to you guys, and kind of show off. So ultimately, I'm going to go over three different builds. All of these are AoE builds, AoE dungeon builds, and then kind of go over some of the little nuances and things that have come to my attention, and we'll go from there. So starting off, I wanted to go over this build because this build is the one that you actually get the most like things from, abilities and things that you have to like watch as you're doing your rotation. And so this is going to kind of where you're going straight down this tree. We are getting this 2-minute convoke. You're also getting your circle of life and death. You're getting apex. You're getting the rip and tear, but you're also getting the adaptive swarm with the spread adaptive swarm. Um, which is the ultimate goal of this whole thing. However, I'm going to go down, and I'm going to go down the tree real quick and just kind of show some of the synergies and things that I've learned. And this is going to apply to all of the trees. And then we'll kind of go over the specifics of each tree and what each tree uh, or each build kind of gives a benefit to. So jumping down, one of the big, like the entire top portion is pretty much a standard at this point. Uh, Double rate claws definitely, I would say, a set in stone AoE talent at this point because of how they've given us infected wounds down here. Um, and it does so much damage overall, as well as now with some changes. We have some room inside our rotation inside dungeons to get more rakes out across a group. So definitely going to take double clawed rake. Most of this up here is standard. Jumping down here, one thing that you would notice is actually going to be that I have 1 point in sudden ambush, and this is because of the fact that we have infected wounds and double clawed rake. Is that you will only ever press sudden ambush procs when you're applying a rake. You don't ever want to press it with a shred, and in AOE you should never be pressing shred anyway. There is little times with the builds that I'm going to go over where shred might be a button that you press just because it feels like it should be, that you need something to press because you're running out of charges and so on with Brutal Slash, which we'll talk about that here in just a second. So having the 1 point in here gives you that 25% chance every time you use a finisher to get the stealth variant of Rake, which is a 60% increased damage bonus. So you get the 60% increased damage bonus, plus you have 30% from here, and then you're spreading it across 2 targets. And it does a very good amount of damage, even though one of the nerfs that's more so recent is the initial damage of Rake was nerfed. And it is what it is at this point. They didn't nerf the bleed though, and that's what all of this is really meant to amp up is the bleed from Rake. They didn't nerf that. That's still the same, so you're still getting full benefits from the bleed over that duration. Um, so that's something you'll notice. As well as another thing you'll notice is that I didn't take Moment of Clarity. And this is where the point for Sudden Ambush came in. And this is kind of where like it's up in the air a little bit. And it's kind of like your preference. Because Moment of Clarity is very good for energy, right? Because you're getting those free uses of abilities, 50% more from your Omen procs. And that just, it feels good to have that, as well as it's giving you 15% increased damage to your next Shred, Thrash, Brutal Slash. And Brutal Slash obviously pairs up with Swipe if you were to take Swipe. When it comes down to it and you're just looking at the breakdown though, the overall damage that you're doing is definitely like Rip and then Rake as far as priority. And then everything else is much, much lower as far as its overall percentage inside a dungeon that you're gaining from it. So 15% increased damage to Brutal Slash or Thrash is going to give you as much as a 60% chance across all of your rakes. Now, this is obviously very much based on how often it procs for you, and 2 points in this would obviously make it proc significantly more. And that's kind of where you can kind of decide like if it feels like you're starved for energy more often, then you can go with the moment of clarity and just forego the sudden ambush, which your rake will just do less damage if it procs, but it's your rake is still going to do significantly a significant portion of your overall damage, as long as you're making sure to spread it across targets inside a group. But sudden ambush, this is something that in a lot of builds I'll take, but it is still very much like a cross between of how you feel. As we get more gear and we actually get up to when it goes live and you have more gear that you can attribute to haste while still having good mastery and a decent crit chance, then you might be able to swap these around, or at the beginning it might feel better to play Moment of Clarity, and later on you swap it over to Sudden Ambush just for that chance of that extra proc, and we go from there. Also, one of the things I wanted to point out is Sabretooth. This is something that I was testing a good chunk of, and I don't know when it actually got changed or when I just didn't notice it effectively. But I've talked about Sabretooth giving you a buff, right? An aura that you can track every time that you press Ferocious Bite, which gives you that 25% increased damage to all your rips. Now, this is literally just a buff that will proc up now, and you can track it. And I will show a video clip while I'm talking about this, showing that that proc. I made a big weak aura, and so previously when I gave the advice that like you don't want to override it, because my previous assumption and with the way it was seeming to play out is that when you applied to rip and you press ferocious bite, it was amping up those specific rips that you had, and not just any rips that you have over the duration of after you press it for the 4 seconds after you press ferocious bite. It is very much that how that works though now is that you just get a buff for your character that amps up all of your rip damage across your targets. So as soon as you get those ferocious bite procs from Apex, press it immediately. That way you can make sure that you're not losing out or refreshing that proc, and make sure you're hitting it frequently. As long as you have your rips going right across your targets. If you don't have rips going, then obviously get rips on the target before you press that. So if you let it fall off for whatever reason, don't just press your proc. This also comes down to more of a min-max thing where the uptime is something I've talked about previously with Sabretooth, and you want as much uptime on this as possible because Ferocious Bite itself actually doesn't do very much damage. Even Ferocious Bite combined with the Rampant Ferocity isn't doing a ton of your damage, but the 25% increased damage across for Rip is huge, and you want to try to get as much of this uptime as humanly possible. So if you get back-to-back procs very, very quickly, which does happen very, very frequently, that is the time where you do want to hold for 4 seconds. So if you have all of your bleeds up across all of your targets, and then you get a proc, you hit that proc immediately. If you get another proc immediately after you press that proc, you actually want to hold on to that one because the objective is to get the Sabretooth buff for as long as possible. And that's how you're going to optimize that as much as possible. So as soon as you get that proc and you have your rips up there for at least 4 seconds, absolutely press it. And then, obviously make sure you wait, which having a weak aura that shows this nice big in the screen is something that's helped me drastically. That way I'm not just sitting there spamming those procs out, and you're increasing your damage by a significant amount by, making sure that you're not just refreshing it, so like you're not spamming out those procs. So keep that in mind as you are doing your rotation. And this one more thing I'm going to kind of lock into here is like also when you're inside your berserk window and you're spamming out a whole bunch of finishers, just spamming out primal ras, there's actually a case if you don't get like a proc, a ferocious bite, where you might just use one of those to proc one of those full 5 combo points that you get from generation during Berserk to Ferocious Bite instead of just Primal Wrath again, to get all of your bleeds to just do effectively that much more damage. Because 25% increased damage across all of your bleeds depends on how many targets you have, and it could just be worth it to press that instead of just renewing those, especially if you're able to do it super, super quickly, where it's only taking like 2 GCDs to get the full range of it across all of your targets. Which is something that I was showing to give not only a little bit more burst because you're getting some rampant ferocity damage inside of that mass AoE, but also you're just getting those amped up sections. So Sabretooth giving you that buff, use it as soon as you get the procs, and then make sure you're not just refreshing that proc and wasting that time frame. You know, it's 4 seconds, so 4 seconds, as soon as it jumps down to that one, hit it again, you know, so on and so forth, so you can keep it going as much as possible. Rampant Ferocity for that burst, that mini burst damage in between to just get a little bit more out of those ferocious bites. Definitely worth it, in my opinion. And if you didn't take this, you'd have to pretty much put the point inside sudden ambush because it's the only way to get down to the left side of the tree. So I think having these two is definitely it's better to have one for rampant ferocity and one sudden ambush instead of two sudden ambushes to get those increased proc rates going down the tree. Um, then one of the things coming down here a little bit lower into the tree, we already talked about Moment of Clarity, and Moment of Clarity, you know, is just dependent on energy. But the other thing is you see that I have Heart of the Lion, but then on the other side of the tree I don't have Frenzy, and this is going to come down to how quick. Like mainly when we actually start getting into like set in stone time frames for groups and how quickly the dungeons are being pulled, especially at higher keys, depends on which ones you would want to pick. Because the reduced CDR is going to let you get more of those ferocious bite, or those berserk windows, not ferocious bite, but berserk windows out. But if like you're able to, if the dungeon's aligning to 3 minute cooldowns, you know, consistently, like your big packs or your boss fights, or every 3 minutes or something like that, then it could just be better to forego the cooldown reduction on Berserk and go over into Frenzy, because Frenzy is going to give you, you know, that increased damage inside those burst phases, as well as it's going to give you more, you know, burst phases in AoE when you're berserking in AoE, because anything that you use like your brutal slash on inside that AoE is going to get a big bleed on it. As well as your single target, because in this build you get Convoke, and Convoke is very good and synergizes very well with Frenzy because you're going to push out that many more abilities inside that Convoke window, which means you're going to get far more combo point generating abilities within your Berserk window than you normally would. So the Frenzy actually gets more value from it, and that's why, like currently on Shadowlands, that's why Frenzy Band was strong, was because you can Convoke during it, which would just give you far more combo point generating abilities, which just give you a bigger bleed. One of the downsides to this, though, is that inside that AoE environment, is that currently we are taking Brutal Slash. And this was very much because of the nerf that they did to Swipe. And it's because now Brutal Slash is about doing almost 2.5 times what Swipe does. And then over a course of a dungeon, when I was testing, it does about 1 million more damage than Swipe does, which you're pressing it less often than you are Swipe, because Swipe obviously doesn't have any charges. So it does seem like Swipe or Brutal Slash is just going to be the go-to in most of the builds at this point, because of the nerf to Swipe, and that feels kind of odd. I'm not the biggest fan of having to play Brutal Slash as our main combo point generator and AOE spender inside our AOE combo point generating ability, because of the fact it has charges. So you have to make sure you plan around that. Like if you're going to go into a big pack, you want to make sure you have all three of your charges. And that also, that you're, instead of going in there and just pressing this ability, that you're actually going in there and spreading your rakes around first, because of all of our increased damage through rake. You want to have rake up there early and often, right, on multiple targets, but you also want to give time for all of the targets to actually come in together and then spin your charges, because if you're spinning it before all the targets are there, you're wasting damage, right? But that's also another thing that like limits what Frenzy can do in AoE, because since you're not just being able to swipe whenever you want, and swipe is going to put bleeds across all the targets, you are just going to have the 3 charges. So like you will do some pretty good initial bleed damage with Frenzy if you have Frenzy and Berserk, by having your 3 charges ready when you go into a pack, as well as you're getting all that extra bleed damage from raking things around, because those are combo point generating abilities as well. So, you know, like I said, this right here is going to really come down to the dungeon, and how 3 minutes versus, you know, about our minute 25 or minute 50, or minute 25, like minute and a half or so, not minute 50, minute 25, minute 50 or so cooldown for Berserk goes, if you can keep the CDR rolling. So in most of the builds, you'll see that one of these are picked, often as the CDR one, just for, because, you know, as we're doing this in pugs, and there's not really a set in stone time frame, and we're not doing the highest level of keys where you are taking more time on per mob and so on and so forth. That CDR just seems easier to get those uh, berserks back up and ready for whatever the pug is pulling. But this might be more of more damage if we go back to like a 3-minute cooldown. So you'd have the 3-minute cooldown and you'd have the 2-minute cooldown with Convoke as well for this build. And like I said, Brutal Slash is going to be our thing. Now Brutal Slash is its charges are based off of haste, which I know that a lot of people are talking about like a haste build. Haste doesn't feel that great, and it's not giving that much benefit, and it takes a ton of points to divert into haste in order to actually get benefit off of this. And so I would recommend still not going full haste. You still want a little bit, right? You want a little bit of haste. I think right now my character's sitting around 12% haste when you're not shifted, when you shifted into cat form anyway. So like if I were to get out of this flight form and jump over here and shift in, it's going to go from 18 to 11. So we're right there. Probably get it up to 12 or so. And then we're sitting close to 30% crit and almost 50% mastery with 10% verse. Is what I currently am messing around and playing with. And even people that are saying that they're running haste builds, if you look at it, especially when they're shapeshifted in cat form, because you have to take in consideration Lycara's teachings, which gives you 6% depending on the form you're in. When they actually are in cat form, they actually don't have nearly as much haste as they do with the rest of their stats because mastery is super, super strong for all of our abilities. Versatility, same deal, very strong for all of our abilities, but at a much lower ratio. And then crit just allows us to get more finishers out, which I think are going to be stronger than having an additional tick for the moment. But we will get more haste as we get more gear because a lot of our tier has haste on it, as well as there is like big rings inside the raid that have like a massive amount of mastery on it, but then they also have haste. So like there's one ring I remember in particular that has a decent chunk of haste on it, but then it has like almost 1100 mastery on it, which is probably going to be our go-to ring. But we'll see. Um, so that's a synergy. Like if you want to pick either one of these on the side, either one is the same point going down the system, and it doesn't stop you from going down the tree to make the build happen. With this build, you are going down the center, so you are going to get your survivability back with survival instinct. So once again, you're getting another ability back inside this build, but you are going to frantic momentum, which is definitely less energy gained than Cat's Curiosity, which is something I've played on multiple other builds. But this is also something that if you're going to take Cat's Curiosity, you should play Moment of Clarity, just because you get that 50% more of those clear casted abilities, and this one you're generating 25% off, so the synergy there is just very, very strong to have Cat's Curiosity, Moment of Clarity, and your Omen of Clarity. But then we jump down here to the bottom. And one of the things I want to kind of go over is the adaptive swarm versus the carnivorous. Carnivorous by default, and just like if you were to look at it just from an outside looking in kind of viewpoint, I guess, is that 12% damage over all of your abilities for a very long duration, if not the continuous course of that entire either pack that you're fighting or boss encounter, because you have Raging Fury. And Raging Fury gives you a ton of that duration increase, especially since we're running Convoke, because since you're running Convoke, all of those bites that it does is going to increase your duration on your Tiger's Fury. So having Convoke tied into this build, you get a ton of uptime on Tiger's Fury. However, the 12%, if you were to think about it, because if you're comparing, pretty much the trade-off on most builds is you take Adaptive Swarm or you take Carnivorous Instincts. Most of the stuff on the right-hand side, you're going to take Apex because it's too strong not to take it, and you need it for that Sabretooth buff, as well as Circle and Life and Death. Once again, this is just too strong, too core to all of our builds, that running without either one of these in AoE, probably never going to happen. So pretty much it's normally a toss-up between Adaptive Swarm and Carnivorous Instincts, which in a perfect world, if you were to have perfect uptime with Adaptive Swarm, you would actually pretty much gain a 12% damage buff, because 12.5% damage buff if you had perfect uptime. So like a complete 50% uptime on Adaptive Swarm, because the effectiveness is increased by 25%. However, it's jumping off, right? So every 9 seconds it's jumping back and forth. So if you have a complete 50% uptime, you're actually only getting like a 12.5 overall of the course of all the damage that you're going to get from Adaptive Swarm, um, which that 12.5 is not increasing damage of every ability. It's just your periodic effects, which is where it kind of loses out a little bit against Carnivorous Instincts. But once again, both of them have the opportunity to not be up 100% of the time, even though like you can make it pretty close, because like if you have good RNG with the procs with Unbridled Swarm, as well as over here if you have good consistent effort to keep Tiger's Fury up with your finishers, as well as you're syncing it up pretty well with Convoke on boss fights, and using it wisely where you're not pressing Tiger's Fury as soon as it's off cooldown, because sometimes you'll be able to have it off of cooldown for a couple seconds because you'll still have the Tiger's Fury, and making sure that you're not wasting that damage potential unless you need the energy from Tiger's Fury, and so on and so forth, as well as making sure you're using those Predator procs to continuously keep it up, because anytime something dies, it's a free GCD to just press Predator, right? Because you don't need to, it's off the GCD, so you can just press it whenever you want. So I would recommend anytime something dies, you pretty much press it to reset it and give yourself that time back. And then Adaptive Swarm is one of those things where you just want to keep it rolling out. Inside AoE, you want to just make sure you're tracking this the best you can as far as it leaping onto your targets when it's actively damaging targets, as well as, if it jumps, as soon as it jumps off of your targets, then you're using your active press of Adaptive Swarm to press it back onto another target, so that you keep it going where you're pressing it on targets that don't have Adaptive Swarm. There are even times when it's on the enemies that I press it on a party member, so that I can keep getting those Adaptive Swarms out, and that way we keep rotating things out, because there's times in between runs when we're making our way towards a mob or something, where you're going to have a decent chunk of seconds on your way there, and you can probably get one at least out and then still have one relatively at the beginning of a pull. And every single time it leaps, it has a chance of splitting. So if you put it on a party member, then it has a chance to split into two the moment you engage a pack, and then you'll have a third one that's ready when you engage that pack as well, because you'd have one leaping from a party member and then one that you're actively pressing, to get that much more activity out as soon as possible. So keeping uptime on this is very, very good as well. But the big thing that's the kicker between it, like sure, Carnivorous Instincts is going to buff all of your abilities, but Adaptive Swarm has utility in it, in the fact that it heals the entire group, right? Especially if you just keep it going. Pretty much if you just always press it on cooldown, you'll pretty much have it on your party the whole time, as long as your party member is not dying and you're not resetting. You can pretty much have the splits continuously across your party and just leaping back and forth to enemies in your party, which gives a decent chunk of healing. Passive healing, it's just giving a hot across everybody, which is just good utility inside a dungeon. You're giving that increased survivability across the entire group. So Adaptive Swarm definitely gives you that. And then, Convoke, having the 2-minute Convoke instead of the 1-minute Convoke is still very good. You get that very good burst damage. Once you have all of your bleeds up and active across all your targets and pressing this inside AoE. We've talked about the synergies previously, because every time it Ferocious bites and you have Rampant Ferocity, it's going to give you AoE burst, as well as it's going to have all of its damage over time that it's placing out on multiple targets. Like it's going to suppress Moonfire across multiple targets, going to put Rake across multiple targets, and your Rakes are amplified, and all the amplification that you have inside your talents are going to apply to the Convoke window, as well as all of that damage is going to be happening, in 25% less time. So it is a good little burst of damage even in AoE. You just have to make sure that since we are playing the 2-minute, that you are like, okay, this is going to be very strong for priority targets. Let me make sure that I have this for the bosses. So you want to make sure you're timing things correctly. As well as the one other synergy I want to talk about with Convoke, which we kind of talked about with Frenzy Band, is that if you have the Frenzy aspect of Berserk, you want to be pressing Convoke inside your Berserk because of how much bleed you'll get. However, if you're going to take the CDR and you're going to take Convoke, then I would actually recommend not pressing Convoke inside your Berserk, because the only thing it's going to do is anytime it presses a Rake or a Shred, is that it's going to get the increased stealth damage that Berserk would have. And it actually feels really good to go in there, get all of your bleeds up, press your Convoke, get that extended Tiger's Fury where Tiger's Fury is going to be there for your entire Convoke, and then you're going to have this very elongated Tiger's Fury so that then you can Berserk, and your entire Berserk window could have a Tiger's Fury across it as well as your Convoke. And once you Convoke and you get that good burst damage single target, then you can press your as soon as you're done with Convoke, you'll have 5 combo points. Press that Berserk, and then you can go into that immediate finisher, which is going to give you that feedback of 2 combo points from Berserk, and then you can sit there and go into a Shred Bite, Shred Bite, Shred Bite in single target, or you can go into the Brutal Slash Bite, Brutal Slash Bite, Brutal Slash Bite for 3 of those, and then after that, you're going to start weaving in those rakes and so on and so forth. So that's kind of a lot of the synergies I wanted to talk about going into the builds. So this last little tidbit is just like if you're going to play Convoke without Frenzy, I would recommend using it outside of your Berserk window. If you are going to have Frenzy, then use it within. Um, and this right here actually looks like kind of the most promising because it gives you the most things, right? The most abilities, as well as it gives you kind of the most defensive route to take, as well as some of the most, I guess, utility, because you're getting the heal from Adaptive Swarm across everybody. Convoke would heal, have the capability of healing, as well as you're having your survival instincts go across all the targets. It also makes it kind of interesting because you're looking for the sudden ambush procs. You're looking at your CD reduction from Berserk to make sure that you're getting as much out of your Berserk cooldown window, as well as you're keeping track of your 2-minute Convoke and all of your Adaptive Swarms across everything. So like there's a lot to track inside this build, which does make it very interesting inside it, as well as you're tracking your charges from Brutal Slash, which this does feel a little bit like you're bottlenecked into doing other stuff on downtime, because once you get those charges out and you're waiting for the charges to come back, that's the time where you're probably going to be jumping around targets and placing rakes out. However, there is times where you have rakes across the entire group, like if it's a smaller pack, like let's say 4 or 5 targets or so, even 6 targets, you'll have rake pretty quickly across all of those targets, and then you'll run out of brutal slashes. And this is one of the things that's going to kind of come to effect with all of these, is that owl weaving, if you're going to do it, because of the brutal slash being on cooldown, then one AoE Sunfire will actually do more damage inside that 5 to 6 target uh, that 5 to 6 target scenario we're talking about. One Sunfire will do more than a Shred would. So if you find yourself getting to the point where, okay, I don't have any charges, I don't have I don't have a sudden ambush proc to press an amplified rake across the target, and all the targets have rake on it currently, then maybe you will pop out, put Sunfire, AoE Sunfire across the group, and then shift back in and go about your rotation from there. So owl leaving could be a thing there, and if you do go owl leaving, it's pretty much what I took out was just getting down to the stick hide, which is 3 points. That gives us another point in the improved Sunfire, because you need this in order to AoE everything, as well as I put 2 points in Nurturing Instincts so that you get a little bit of that increased magical damage for survivability, or for the loss of some of the survivability. So you could go this route, as well as making sure that you're monitoring when you have Tiger's Furies, because if you have Tiger's Fury, especially if something just died, then you could definitely press it really quickly and then shapeshift immediately back in with Tiger's Fury resets. So that's definitely something you can weave in if you are out of, like I said, if it comes down to the scenario where you're out of brutal slash charges, and you have rake across all the targets, and you don't have sudden ambush proc. That's pretty much what it comes out to. However, you might find yourself that you might get enough sudden ambush proc to just stay in and override your rakes on your targets, as well as adaptive swarm being an actively pressed button kind of fills some of that void a little bit. So you can actively press, adaptive swarm while you're waiting for a brutal slash to come in, as well as you have 2 different cooldowns that you can utilize to kind of make up for some of the time gap while you're doing it. So like if you're going into a pack and you want to get the most bang for your buck, you might especially in AoE, you could go in there, you press Tiger's Fury, you get rake out because you'll be stealth rake to get that 60% guaranteed across your target. So you get 60% across the the increase across those two targets. And then you're going to thrash, get your bleeds up across all of them, thrash, and then you would brutal slash to that 5 combo point, and then you could primal wrath, but then you want to spin the other two charges of your brutal slash very quickly. So you brutal slash, and if those get you very close to another primal wrath, then you might brutal slash rake, and then primal wrath, and then convoke, because then convoke's going to give you that duration to kind of get back your charges, um, as well as you could. Instead, if brutal slash critted twice, then you'd have 4 points, and you could just place the primal wrath up with the 4 combo points instead of the 5. We've talked about that in previous videos, where pressing primal wrath at 4 targets, or 4 combo points, is still worthwhile if you don't get that extra 5th combo point, especially since you're just going to be refreshing it very, very quickly, right? And in this scenario, you're going to have convoke, so as soon as convoke is done, you'd primal wrath immediately afterwards, and then you'd have some more charges to play with. So that's kind of what I'm looking at, is like, what do you do when you don't have charges and you have rake on all the targets, and kind of some of the little things that are synergistic between all of the talents that we have. So this is that first build, and that's going down all of these, and those synergies are going to play inside the other builds I'm going to show. So if we jump over here to the second one, this is going to just pretty much swap over from the adaptive form to the carnivorous instincts. So this is giving you all of the same things that you would have previously, except for, like I said, this one jumped over into the frenzy, which you can go for the CDR over the frenzy, as well as you're going to have that 12% increase for Tiger's Fury. And this does amount to some pretty good single target burst damage, because you're going to have a 27% Tiger's Fury across all of your abilities, and then that 27% is also going to apply to everything you do in Convoke, and then that 27% is going to apply to everything that you do within your Convoke and your Berserk, because you'll have it across that entire duration, which is kind of why I selected the Frenzy Band with the Carnivorous Instincts one, because you're not reliant on pressing Adapter's Form. All of this is going to happen very, very quickly, which gives you some very good burst damage inside dungeons. So I would say that this one would have a little bit more burst potential than the previous build, where we didn't take this and you took Adaptive Form, because you're going to put your bleeds up, you're going to press Adaptive Form, and then you're going to press your Convoke, and then you press your Berserk afterwards, which is maybe more consistent damage, and it might not peak as high of damage initially that this build will, but it might be more consistent damage. This one, you're going to kind of front load it all up. So if stuff is dying very quickly, or you need something to die, like mini bosses and stuff are dying very quickly. Also, if you have synergy where you have people that are doing very, very big burst damage alongside you, so things are just going to die very, very quickly, then this would be more of a very burst, kind of build for single target scenarios as well as AoE, because AoE scenario, you would do the same thing. You would be using your Convoke inside your Berserk window, and then you'd be using all of your Brutal Slashes within that Berserk window as well, very, very quickly, to get that additional Frenzy Bleed across everything. So that's pretty much the only thing that's changed in this build, but it definitely changes the dynamic of the group, because the other one's more so a sustained, sustained AoE damage, because you have the Unbridled Swarm popping off all over the place, where you can get that amped up Primal Wrath across existing targets. So like a high level fortified key, that'd be really good for. And then this one might be good for more of a tyrannical, or even a tyrannical type key, where you have a little bit more burst on that single target. Or if you're, like I said, your group dynamic is a little bit more bursty, where things aren't just going to live for a long period of time, then you could use this build to get a little bit more of your burst in there as well. And then the other one is the very first one, which this is the one that doesn't have Convoke, and it doesn't have Unbridled Swarm, but it does have all of the amplifications of Berserk, as well it does have the synergy for energy across Moment of Clarity, Cat Eye Curio, and your Omen of Clarity. And this is, I would say this is a easier, consistent AoE build, because there's less to track. You don't have that double cooldown, because you don't have Convoke, and you don't have Adaptive Swarm that you have to monitor and try to min-max across it. Pretty much in this build, you're monitoring your procs from Moment of Clarity and trying to make sure you're utilizing those the best you can to amplify your certain abilities. So like if Thrash is coming off cooldown, use it on Thrash, because Thrash is going to have a larger duration, as well as Brutal Slashes would be the next one that you'd want to, because you can use one proc for that, and then your Brutal Slash charges can take over the remainder of the procs. until, once again, you need to refresh that Thrash across targets, because Thrash is doing a decent amount of damage now. It's not as much of a wet noodle as it was previously. It is competing with other damage, and like with the new tuning on Swipe, Thrash is actually often beating the new Swipe. So you know, I know we've looked down on Thrash quite a bit in the past, but it's not as much of a wet noodle as it was previously. It's still not the strongest ability. It is definitely more of a modifier bleed to allow all of the effects that require bleeds across targets to do more damage, but it's not nearly as, I would say, horrible as it used to be. So make sure it doesn't fall off. Keep it up. And then, so you're monitoring these procs, and then you're monitoring your sudden ambush proc. If you get it, you want to make sure that you're placing the rake on new targets and not your active target that already has rakes on it. You want brand new rakes instead of overriding existing rakes. You want to put brand new ones out and then just place those other rakes and refresh them as they start to fall off, depending on how many targets you have, right? So, monitoring what targets have what kind of bleeds on them, what targets have which amped up bleeds on them. That's always something that Feral's had for a very, very long time, is that kind of snapshotting effect. And this is kind of adding that snapshotting back into rakes, which got taken out with the new iteration of Blood Talons, which we're not even using Blood Talons inside these AoE builds. But, it's something that's kind of brought back to it to allow it to do some additional damage. So I would say that this is probably the easiest one to play out of all of the builds, as well as, it could be very rewarding to play this because simplicity often yields good results. And then once you get this down and you're monitoring those procs, then you can start increasing with the Adaptive Swarm and the Convoke, and start working all of those abilities in there. As well, this is probably the most energy efficient build because of how many things that you have. Obviously, you have Predator that's going to give you those resets. You always have tireless energy in all of these builds, so you're going to get that energy 30 increased energy as well as 10% energy regeneration. But since you're getting Omen of Clarity 50% more often, and all of those are giving 50% of their energy cost back, as well as you have Soul of the Forest giving you 3 energy per combo point spent on any of your finishers, you're getting a significant amount of energy back in total. So this is a very, you won't feel as energy starved in this build as you will with some of the others, depending on how you work around it, right? The other ones definitely incentivize more owl weaving or, using a shred here and there if you don't have the adaptive swarm, or you don't get procs or so on and so forth. That's a lot of what I wanted to talk about, is ultimately going over the synergies of the builds, uh, and all of those discussions I had on that first tree, which apply to all 3 of these trees, as well as, you could end up owl leaving if you feel like you run out of charges on Brutal Slash. Ultimately, I'm not into. I don't like tuning is fine, right? Tuning classes are fine. However, if tuning gets to the point where it eliminates an ability, that's where, in my opinion, it becomes a problem, because I understand everybody's like, okay, well, Swipe was doing a ton of damage, and Swipe was getting to the point where some people like pointed out, like Swipe was getting to the point where like it was very close to shred damage, and it's like, okay, I understand that. I can see where that's coming from. Shred has I would say better potential inside like a single target berserk window because it gets double crit from its like shred variant when it's doing things like within berserk. So like there are times where you would definitely never press it, even if Swipe technically was more damage on a single target than shred would be, just because of the crit capabilities of it. I do understand that standpoint. However, if Brutal Slash is just going to be almost 2.5 times stronger than Swipe, then in AoE you're going to take Brutal Slash, and then in single target, because of its energy, is why you're going to take it in single target, because of the amount of damage it does, and it's doing more damage than Shred is, single target wise. So that's where it's like, this is the same thing we did previously, right? It's lower energy than all of the other abilities, and now it's doing more damage than all of the other abilities. So you will use Brutal Slash over Shred in single target, and now you're going to definitely use Brutal Slash over Swipe in AoE. So we're kind of eliminating some of the functionalities of those groups. Which is weird, right? It feels bad. The only time that Shred would be more prioritized over Brutal Slash is, like I said, inside that Berserk window where it gets its stealth functionality, where it's getting 60% increased damage and it's getting double crit modifier added onto it inside the Berserk window. So, keep that in mind. And I do hope that we get slight changes and adjustments to some of the tuning that we have. Brutal Slash does allow for some kind of burst inside an AoE potential, but then it falls off, right? So like unless it's going to the pack is going to die very, very fast. Like you're going to use your 3 charges and then it's gone. And then, like I said, it incentivizes a haste build, but the amount of haste that you need to get the cooldown down far enough to where it like feels like you're not going to be running out of charges very much, or by the time you use the 3rd charge at the, you get the first one back, so on and so forth. You would have to put an absorbent amount of haste in there, and if you put that much haste in there, you're losing out on combo point generation, and even more so, you're losing out on that mastery, which is just, I would say, too good to lose out on both those aspects to our build to try to get the cooldown reduction of this down far. I tried to go with like full haste build and see how far I could get it down, and it wasn't going down very much. Like right now it says 6.8, but that's because I'm not like in cat form. So if I were to go in cat form, and then my stats are going to change, and then you would go over it, it's a 7.2 charge rate, and that's a lot of that's a lot of haste to just go down 0.4 points, right? So it was a 6.8 and now it's a 7.2, and my haste is 11% in cat form, and if I shift out of cat form it goes up to 18%. So it's 18. It required 7% haste in order to go down zero point 0.4 of seconds, which isn't even like a full half a second, right? It's not even a 0.5 of a second. So you need 7% to get to zero point 0.4, which is a lot of haste. And haste is not the best scaling, not the best ratio stat for us. Obviously, mastery is. The more mastery you have, the more bang for your buck you're going to get, ultimately, is what it comes out to. So keep that in mind, as well as crit gives us so much. Not only is it giving us that double damage from just proccing crits, but it's giving us so much more combo point generation, which allows us to get that much more finishers out, which ultimately gives us that much more damage. So I definitely think that crit mastery is definitely still the way to go. I would say get to that 50%, which is that 3rd DR level of mastery, which is what I tried to get to here, and then start jumping into more verse, and you can kind of go into that verse haste build. I guess you could try to transfer more of the versatility into haste, but versatility is very good when you start getting into higher keys where you get lower damage done to you, even when you don't have your defensives going on. So keep that in mind as well as you are looking into these builds, as well as versatility, increase the damage of everything that you do. It just has the worst ratio out of all of our stats as far as getting points in them. So keep that in mind as we're looking over all of this. And yeah, I think that's ultimately all that I learned about our spec from this last Mythic Plus weekend. The new dungeon, Hall of Valor, I do have a couple good runs, and I do want to kind of do like a guide while I'm going over it, like I did with the Algatha's Academy. Pretty much the overview takeaways. TLDR of it is that they added rendering strikes to pretty much all the champions, which beats the crap out of tanks, so you got to make sure you're mindful about that. And Urasol's Vortex is very, very good for that. Typhoon's good for that, to get them away if they need to, reduce those stacks or just kite them out for a bit, as well as utilizing your range. But anyway, back to Halls of Valor. The rending strikes are an issue for tanks, and then the only other issue, like the dungeon was actually pretty nice now, with the amount of tuning and adjustments that they've done inside Hall of Valor. They also reduced the overall time from like 45 minutes to 38. There's still a lot of RP, which I wish that they would lessen the amount of RP in there, but some of the RP in there is kind of iconic, so I doubt it. But the only other issue is still Herja, and it's her when she goes to the right side, the Sanctify. If people get hit by that, it just annihilates the party, especially in 15 plus keys. You need to make sure that you run away from those and dodge every single one of them, because if not, then the person that gets hit by one is going to take damage, and then that same damage is going to get splashed across to all of the party members. So that person's going to take double damage, and then everybody else is going to take initial damage from it as well. And it's very hurtful, I would say, because like somebody getting hit by like two, three of these, you're dead. But past that, Sanctified inside Halls of Valor, and like I said, the rending strikes that they put on the champions, the dungeon was fine to play. and aesthetically it looks very nice. The speed boosts are really cool to play with, and the fights are all, decently okay. Um, and I don't think I have too much more to worry about that. The wolves next to Fenrir, don't pull too many of them all at once because they will leap and kill your party members if you pull too many of them. And that is kind of all that I have. You can use your Ursol's Vortex there as well to keep them inside and stop them from leaping out to your range, but it doesn't stop them with, current comps being very melee heavy currently from just pouncing on all of the melee. So keep that in mind in there. The last tidbit, and this is not to do with any of our current builds, and this is something that might not even see the light of day in an actual build, but it will be interesting to see, is that in PTR there was a build that actually applied a change to Vein Ripper, where Vein Ripper, it showed that it was going to have it was going to modify our Primal Wrath. So that was something I glanced over on one of the data mines for PTR changes, which is something that, like, on our very first look over of all of the talents, we mentioned that it doesn't affect it. It doesn't give a 25% increase duration to Primal Wrath rips, and it looks like it's going to be changed to actually be able to do that. So that could be interesting. It's going to have to. I don't know inside this build, at least the AOE functionality of the build, where it would come out to take over for Rip and Tear, because of the fact that it's a 12% of your previous rip, and our rips are our highest damage ability. So getting this tear out for every time you press the ability is just kind of free damage, especially in AOE since we're AOEing this across everything. Um, I don't I don't foresee it. I don't foresee Vein Ripper taking it over, but you never know, right? I didn't honestly think that Brutal Slash was going to take over Swipe, but here we are, right? And this is kind of actually kind of funny because, like, in the very first alpha build of Feral Druids, where most of us were not very happy with the state of Feral Druid in alpha, is that you were forced to take Brutal Slash in order to go down to the Apex Predator side to get that side of the tree, and you're not forced to take it now, but now it's just like, if you want to do optimal damage, then you're going to take it, which is kind of funny. It's kind of like, oh, this is the idea we had for it on the very first alpha build, and now if you want to do good damage, you're going to take it, which kind of sucks, but it is what it is. It allows for some interesting gameplay. It's a little more complex. It is fun to track all of the stuff and kind of like weave it in. But the simplicity of being able to have swipe without charges was also very, very nice. I did very much enjoy having the swipe and be able to focus on the other procs that we had: Ferocious Bite procs, Sabertooth uptime, Sudden Ambush procs, and so on and so forth, versus now monitoring the charges on top of all of that and trying to optimize when to use your charges when the mobs are all grouped up and stuff, versus going in there and just starting to go ham on them with some swipe damage and so on. But I think that's all I have for this. This video is probably a little longer than I initially intended, but I hope you guys enjoy. If you guys want to, check me out streaming some of this builds and some of these gameplay next weekend for sure. I'm going to be streaming the Mythic Plus when it gets released again. It's next time it's active anyway, and that's twitch.tv/stageshifter, and I will try to do that. Typically, I'm on very late at night because that's when my kids are sleeping, and it's the easiest time to just stream without having push to talk. When Dragonflight actually comes out, I will definitely stream way more often because obviously there'll be a ton of content. I will just be on push to talk. So if you guys do jump into the stream and you don't hear me talking, feel free to say something so that I can talk back to you, because I do let my kids play around with me and around my computer. So I don't want you guys to have to hear them mess around and playing. So keep that in mind, and come check me out. And past that, thank you guys for watching. Thanks for the subscribers. We're almost to that 1,000 mark, which if I would have kept up with it during Shadowlands beta, I probably would have already been past it by now for sure. But we are on round 2 of trying this. So thank you guys for subscribing, and if you like the content, hit that subscribe button and give me a like if you like the video. If you guys have any additional build synergies or anything that you think that I might have been misunderstanding, mistaken, so forth about Feral Druid, please let me know. I am not the all-knowing individual. I am not the best player in World of Warcraft, and I'm not the best feral player in World of Warcraft. I'm just somebody who enjoys it, who plays it for a very, very long time, since vanilla, and I'm going to continue to play it into Dragonflight. So, past that, thank you guys, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.